Here we go. All right, we are live. Finally, after weeding through some well-expected technical difficulties, I wanted to say welcome to everybody for our panel today, which is part of the Stories That Bind program. And today we're talking about why we make books on story, craft, and connection. But there's a couple of housekeeping things I want to take care of first, and then I'm going to tell you a short story before we get into the nuts and bolts of what we're going to do today. So we're going to have a 5-minute discussion here, kind of a speed round first. I'm going to make introductions of everyone, of course, and then we're going to get into the bulk of the conversation. And then we're going to follow it up with some questions from the audience before saying adios and promoting some of the things that we all want to get across that we have coming in the future. So if you're sitting out there and you're wondering if you're in the right panel, I want to tell you a little story. So I was driving home from dinner last night with my wife. I was on a small side street that spills out into probably the busiest road in Santa Fe. And as we were coming up to the intersection, I looked to my right and there was a little nondescript strip mall. And in the corner of the strip mall was a little store that said used paperback exchange. And I could look inside and I saw rack after rack after rack of books. And I was so distracted and so excited by that I may or may not have almost accidentally driven head on into 4 lanes of oncoming traffic. And I was driving a 19-year-old Toyota RAV4, but I have a rabbit's foot hanging from the rearview mirror. So I'm pretty sure we would have been okay. But if you get that excited by talking about books, then you're definitely in the right panel. So the gist of what we're talking about today is what makes a book more than the sum of the parts. And I want to do a quick introduction of the panelists, the folks that we have joining us here today, because they're kind of a big deal. They're kind of big shots. So let me give a little introduction here. First off, we'll start with Darius Himes. And I'm reading a slightly longer profile because they deserve it. So Darius is the international head of photographs at Christie's. As well as a noted photo book collector, lecturer, and publisher. He co-founded Radius Books, which is based here in Santa Fe, a nonprofit publisher dedicated to photography and the visual arts, and was the founding editor of Photo Eye Book List. He also co-authored Publish Your Photography Book, a definitive guide for aspiring bookmakers. And he's a leading voice in the world of contemporary photo books. He brings a lot of insight and craft into the culture of publishing. And Darius, what printing is your book in right now?
It's in the third edition and already in the second printing.
Wow. Okay. Our next panelist is Christelle Engfest. And Christelle is a Spanish-Swedish photographer and co-founder of the Raw Society, a global community dedicated to documentary, street, and travel photography. After a career in advertising, she set out on a solo journey that reignited her passion for visual storytelling. Her work's been exhibited internationally and was featured in Women's Street Photographers, which was published by Penguin Random House. And she's the editor-in-chief of the Raw Society magazine, as well as she's a photography mentor and fosters creativity throughout workshops and projects worldwide. And she and Raw Society's co-founder, Jorge, who I'll get to in a minute, they have some pretty exciting news about an upcoming festival that they're going to launch in Menorca next year. The second part of Raw Society is our third panelist today, and that's Jorge Delgado Ureña. And Jorge is a Spanish photographer, educator, and also co-founder of Raw. He's got 16 years of experience with photography. He specializes in street and documentary, capturing cultures and connections in everyday life. His works appeared in Nat Geo, La Vanguardia, Fisheye Magazine, and has been exhibited across Europe and Asia. Jorge has led more than 50 workshops worldwide, helping photographers develop their visual voice through hands-on storytelling. And being a workshop instructor myself, 50 is a commendable number. And for those of you out there who are unfamiliar with Raw Society, they are one of the best photo collective communities I've ever seen. So if you're not a member, if you haven't checked out their online community portal, it's the best that I know of out there. So they're a dynamic duo, if you will. And lastly, we have Deb Pang Davis. And anyone who's been around professional photography and photo books in the US in the past several decades knows of Deb. Deb is Blurb's head of design and a creative leader with over 2 decades of experience in editorial design, photography, and product design. She's helped shape Blurb's tools and products, ensuring creators of all kinds can bring their work into print beautifully and professionally. With a background spanning traditional publishing and digital platforms, she offers a rare perspective on how design innovation continues to empower storytellers today. So first of all, thank you all for being here. And I also need to mention that we have two people behind the scenes right now, and none of this would be happening were it not for them being there. And that's Aaron and Michelle. They are the ones who control basically this entire process from start to finish, including all the communications that happen before and after this event. I have the easy part. I get to tell stories about driving in Santa Fe and ask a couple of questions here and there. It's pretty simple. So I want to start this by a speed round, just to get everybody warmed up. You guys ready?
Let's do it.
Okay. And I'll call on you individually, but after I announce the question, what is the first non-photo book to change your life? And we'll start with Deb.
Non-photo book?
Yeah.
That would have to be, I'm sorry?
No, it could be novel, could be a comic book, graphic novel, anything.
Well, the first book I remember as a kid was, I think it was Katie the Snowplow. That was my first as a kid. That changed my life. But as an adult, I think one of the first books, actually it wasn't a book, it was a set of magazines that were put together in a little box. My dad gave it to me, and it was a collection of painters. So impressionist painters.
Interesting.
So that was my first introduction.
Okay. Jorge, what about you?
I have a longer answer because the non-photo book that it changed my way of thinking about the world. It's a Spanish book that no one knows. It was mandatory in school, and it's called Sin Noticias de GURB, which is without news from GURB, and the whole thing is a Martian that goes to Barcelona, which is where I'm from, in the 80s, and he wanders around the city. And it was mandatory in school, and I thought that was very interesting because it makes you think about your own place as a foreigner, and it was pretty cool.
Interesting. Christelle.
Mine was probably House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende. And it's more because it got me, I think it's a weird choice, but it's the book that started making me want to read more. And I barely remember what it was about, but I still really, really remember the girl, I think her name was Rosa, with the green hair. So yeah, that book made me want to read more. And
Darius, how about you?
I'm going to go with The Hobbit, the Tolkien classic. It's not the first book I remember reading, but it was the first one I remember getting completely lost in, and in the sense of a whole world was created, and it was fun to populate and be in that world, and it was filled with images for me.
That's great.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. Interesting. Okay, so next question. We have 3 of these speed round questions. This next one is, what's the first? And my answer for the first one is The Razor's Edge by Somerset Maugham. The second question is, what is the first photo book to change your life? And we'll start with Christelle.
So little interim thing is that I became a photographer late in life. And so for my 30th birthday, before I was even a photographer, I was gifted Africa by Salgado. And so that definitely, marked me even before I was considering becoming a photographer and leaving the dark side of advertising.
And Darius, what about you? What's the first photo book?
The first photo book it was a technical guide called Black and White Photography by Henry Hornstein.
Oh, yeah.
Of classic. And it had that beautiful, elegant Harry Callahan on the cover. And my dad bought it for me. I think I must have been 13 because I was obsessed with learning photography. And it's filled with so many great classic images that I think really excited my creative side.
And Deb, how about you?
I honestly cannot remember, but I do remember magazines being a really important part of my life early on. Probably when I was studying fine art photography, a lot of photographers, I got in through photographs, so not necessarily from the book into photographs, but photographs out to various books. So like, Minor White and Maplethorpe and I don't know, even oh God, what's his name?
I never heard of any of those people, but I'm sure they're.
Yeah, well, a popular one I think was Herb Ritz. Like he, was a big photographer during that time. So that's my entry.
And Jorge, what about you?
I mean, it probably was Inferno, Jim Natzway.
Oh, Natzway, yeah.
That's crazy.
I found Deeds of War in the half price book, not half price, but the University of Texas co-op when I first started. But and mine was Telex Iran by Gilles Perez, which I fumbled and didn't buy at the half price bookstore in Austin. And then I ran into him years later and told him, and he just looked at me like with that look that just said, "Rookie, you're just a total rookie." But I was made whole later by a friend who gifted me his copy. Okay, third speed round question before we get to the real nuts and bolts here. What is the book you think you should make, but you have yet to create? And we'll start with Deb. What's the book you think you're supposed to do, but you haven't done yet?
Yeah, I have a collection of photographs from my father's younger days that are sitting in this box, and I am dying to make a book of his life. There's a big disconnect between, like, in terms of communication, because of language, but also because it was a really troubling time, for his childhood and growing up before he came to the States. So it's going to be quite an emotional journey, but that's the book I would love to make.
Excellent. Jorge, what about you?
It's a good question. I did a project in the Sahara in Morocco, actually. And I called it There Is Life on Mars. I like this whole science fiction mixed with science and all that stuff. And then that project got published in a magazine. So I thought I'm not going to do the book, but I got even, the whole text that I wrote, got it translated to Tamazight, which is pretty cool. And that's the book that I told everybody that I was going to do and never did. And I have to make it. I even did a dummy with one of these
with the trade
books. Yeah.
Oh, of course. Good plug for trade books. Yeah, I'm waiting for this book to come out. So, no pressure. Christelle, what about you?
I think it would have to be the Menorcans. So basically, we've been now living in Menorca for 5 years, and we've been doing little projects, and it's accumulating. It started off with some very interesting local festivals here. And I really want to put that into a really nice book about Menorca and the Menorcans and all the traditions that still exist on the island, and have that as a kind of reference book. So.
Well, when the publisher asks who the audience is, you can say Americans, because when I say I was going to Menorca, they said, no, you're pronouncing it wrong. It's Mallorca. And I say, no, it's actually, you know what I'm saying. Darius, what about you? What's the book that you think you should make that you haven't done yet?
I have a great love, for those who know me deeply, I have a great love of the sacred literature of the world and the books that hold that. And I would love to edit a photo book, photographs by others of those books of image. I've come across so many images that show sacred books out in the world, and I'd love to edit a book about that.
Wow, that's interesting. I mean, what a diverse group of books here. I would love to do a book of individual photographs with a combination of text and story about what was happening behind the scenes when the images were made, but with a humorous twist to it, because I think there's a lack of humor in photo book sort of world and lore. And I think it would be kind of fun to really explain what was happening while certain kind of signature pictures in my career were made, because I think it's a very different story than what most people expect. So it'd be kind of fun. And I love the blend of copy and photographs. Okay, speed round's over. We're heading into the main guts of it. We got about half an hour, and Blurb's about to hit our 20th anniversary, which sounds absolutely incredible. And for those of you who were around back then in the circles, it's still hard to get my head around. I've been at Blurb for 15 years, but to know that we're about to breach the 20-year time frame is incredible. So the first question I have is basically kind of an origin story. What brought you to print, And when did print on demand or one book at a time printing and Blurb hit your radar? So again, what brought you to print in the first place, and when did Blurb pop up on your radar? And I'm going to start with Christelle and Jorge. So Christelle, when did you first hear about Blurb, and how did you get into print in the first place?
I think it's actually a funny story because it wasn't to print a project for myself. Jorge and I had come across a photographer in Cuba, and he had this amazing archive that he had never been able to show elsewhere for obvious reasons. And so we became friends, and I said, well, would you be willing to part with these photographs, well, the negatives for a while, so I can get them scanned and try and get a book out for you, so that more people get to see your book, well, your work. And so we did. And I think here. So we made
a copy.
I have one. And this was actually the very first Blurb book that we made. So in the process of deciding that we were going to do this, I had to research and stumbled across Blurb. And so yeah, it was a great, I think it was a really fun project to do. It was my first time creating a book, and it was nice to do something for another photographer. He now has, about 10 copies in his home and can share it with his friends. And I think it's something really beautiful.
Well, it's interesting too that your first project was not printing your own work; it was printing somebody else. And I think I've done that a couple of times in my career at Blurb, and there's always a sense of reward that's very different than publishing your own stuff. When you see the benefit that befalls the person that you've published, it's a pretty exciting thing. So you guys, Jorge and Christelle, relatively in the grand scheme of things, newcomers to the Blurb system. Darius, you go way back and I'm not sure how many people know about this, but Blurb ran a contest for years called Photography Book Now, which still to this day is the single best book/photography contest I've seen. And it also had the best judging panel that I've ever seen compiled for any contest in photography in my entire career. And Darius was the chief judge. So we haven't run this for probably a decade, and I think a lot of people have completely forgotten about it, but your ties to Blurb go way back. So when did print strike you first, and when did Blurb pop up?
Let's see. So print, I've been a lover of photography and print, and the book form since really, really young. I don't exactly remember how all of that came together, but I went to university, went to art school, studied photography, but also took bookmaking classes. So that whole love of the object and the craft around that. This is still way pre-digital, so everything was in the dark room and doing letterpress books and things like that. So those two loves were deep in me, and in the early 2000s, I started a magazine that was about, or I transformed what was a mail order catalog about photography books into a proper journal about photography books. Came out quarterly. This was in the early 2000s. And I was giving a lecture in New York when Eileen Gittins, I think, saw that lecture. This is maybe 2005 or 2006, and she came to visit me in Santa Fe and said, I'm starting this company and I've got this idea around maybe doing a competition. Would you be interested in being involved? And we launched that. Didn't we launch, Dan, in 2007, I think?
Yeah.
And this competition, it was just called Photography Book Now, and it was sponsored and hosted by Blurb. And it was about self-published books. It didn't have to be a Blurb book, but it needed to be self-published in some way. And that first year, we got something like 2,000 submissions. And Dan was my right arm guy helping with this. And we sort of culled the group down to a manageable number and then built out these panels of judges. Each year, there were 10 judges, 9 guests plus myself, and we just had the best time. So Blurb was so revolutionary at that time, the idea that you didn't have to spend $20,000 to get an offset book made if you wanted to have a book of your work, but you could have one book made at a time was so radical and super fun. So
we're going to get to that more in a minute because I got a couple of questions about that specific thing. But
yeah.
Deb, what was your print origin and when did you first hear about Blurb?
Print origin. I guess I grew up with print. I didn't know anything different until my adult years. So I came into books through design because even though I got a degree in film and photography in undergrad, I quickly fell in love with orchestrating various elements on pages. And this was when I was just learning how to use Adobe tools. And back then it wasn't a suite of tools. It was like you had Adobe Photoshop, you had, I think, Quark Express at the time.
I was going to say Quark Express.
There was like Illustrator was over here. It was not this like fancy thing that we subscribe to right now for gobs of money every single month. And so I had to kind of go back to school to learn like what that was all about. And so that's what I did. And so my path took me into journalism, where if you ever want to speed education on how to put pages together and have typography and images working together, an old school newsroom would be your best place to get that education. So in terms of when did Blurb show up? Blurb showed up probably 2007, 7-ish for me. I remember stumbling upon it, probably the website or something, but I was like, wow, this is so cool. Like, is this for real? Like, I mean, I remember thinking that because it was so unbelievable that this could actually happen. You know, you could actually just print just one book or a very small run of books. And we got a group of photographers together. This was when I was in Portland, Oregon. And we decided to publish a book using Blurb. It was about 5 or 6 photographers with a picture editor and myself. I didn't know anything about book design. I was like, oh my God, what am I getting into? You know, I didn't know anything. I mean, my whole thing was like, you know, editorial, magazines, but it's a totally different thing. Related, different. And anyway, we published a book. It was called Dirty Pictures. The content was about cyclocross community in Portland, Oregon.
Nice.
And because we had made friends with this entire community of cyclocross racers, essentially, we had a built-in audience. And that book sold, like, to the point of what we were like, wow, didn't know we could do that. And they just bought the book straight off the Blurb bookstore. So that was my introduction to Blurb.
Wow. So not only testing out a new platform, but finding sales right off the bat. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it all just went downhill from there, but you know.
Kind of peaked in 2007, but
yeah.
Then I want to shift here to the next question. And the next question, it's multi parts as always. And some of these I want to direct at Deb and Darius, and others. A part of this question I wanted to direct to Cristel and Jorge. What barriers did POD help circumvent? What was the industry reaction? And did it actually democratize printing? So let me repeat this again. And the first part is directed towards Cristel and Jorge. What barriers did POD help circumvent? And I think with you guys, it's the perfect example of you have your own community, you're moving quickly, you're doing a lot of things, and you don't necessarily want or need to get into a long, extended publishing cycle with a publisher or necessarily have the funds to do that. Blurb potentially allowed you to do things quicker and more freer. And then the second parts of that, I'll let you guys answer that first. And then the second parts I'll direct at Deb and Darius. But what was it that being able to print a single copy of a book at a time, Jorge, what did that allow you guys to do?
Well, I think that what it was really interesting is to realize at some point that there was going to be this trend of having an audience for yourself, you know, through newsletters and websites and things like that. and actually was one of my editors in the Geographic, Ismail Sanafria. He decided to go self-publishing, and he did a book about the New York Times. And he told me, you have to self-publish it. Don't try to go anywhere, because you can do one at a time or 100 or whatever it is. And that's pretty cool, because you don't need to commit to something huge. You don't need to spend this kind of money. And then you have, an interesting series of series. For example, you can print that and you can sell it to your own audience, or you can try to do something a little bit bigger, but it's your own choice, and you don't depend on anyone else, basically, which I think is really fantastic. Yeah.
Can I add something, Dan?
Yep.
And going back to our community, so in terms of when we are, you guys know this, we integrate Blurb, and we have all of our participants do a Blurb book or magazine at the end of our workshops. And I think that, first of all, it's something that introduces a photographer to having to sequence a whole bunch of other elements within photography beyond just having your single photographs or putting a collection together for your website. You have to think about pairings and sequencing and what size the image is going to be on the page and all of those kind of things, right? So we started introducing that into our workshops with Blurb, and then so it's a great introduction into self-publishing for starters, I think. And then a lot of, we do it as an exercise in 5 hours during the workshop, and then the participants, if they want, can then go home and continue working on their magazines with more time and reviewing, because doing a magazine in 5 hours is not optimal, I don't think.
And also allows the people to understand that there is something more than doing a few pretty pictures. They understand what it means to do a short story or an essay, and to put something together is a little bit more meaningful than Instagram stuff, for example, which is pretty cool. And you can see people, realizing that on the spot, and that's awesome.
I think it's interesting, because I always tell people that making books or magazines makes you a better photographer. And they, of course, think because I work for Blurb that I'm making that up. But it's true, because I think it shows you immediately what you have and don't have in a narrative or a story. But I want to shift here to the second part of this question. And I want to aim this at Darius and Deb, because I have my own response to this. But the question I really want to ask is, what was the industry, and I guess you would have to say the traditional photography, or maybe even the traditional publishing industry, what was the industry reaction to Blurb? And did it democratize publishing, which is something it's not a phrase that I'm actually that content with. But the reason I'm asking this question is, when I was early on in my days at Blurb, Eileen and I would get invited to photo events, and there was always a publishing panel. And in early days of Blurb, they would stick us way off to the one edge of the panel. And the other end of the panel was more like traditional publishers. And there was always, I don't want to say there was animosity, but there was a little bit of friction, because I think Blurb was kind of a misunderstood entity. So Darius, what was your memory of the response to Blurb?
You want the cleaned up version?
Yeah.
It was traditional publishing, just like traditional media, was built on the idea of gatekeeping and controlling the narrative and maximizing advertisers and revenue through us, just like the music industry. All of these sort of legacy media industries, not just news, but just cultural industries had a lot of that. There was a lot of just gatekeeping, and the idea that we are the experts, we are the ones who know what's good, and you'll read what we say is good. And there was obviously competition among publishers and all of that. And the illustrated book world suffered from a little bit of the idea that if you were too involved as the artist, then it was you were just bypassing the sort of peer review process and making something that was a vanity project. And so Blurb definitely initially took a lot of blows on the chin for somehow enabling that more than it had been in the past. And I think that, Dan, that's exactly what I'm sure that's what you felt. That's what we all sort of felt. And so anyway, that's sort of the short answer. I found this question of the democratization, what I love, like being Gen X and growing up without a cell phone or the internet, was that it was like, oh my God, all of the tools are now in my hands, literally all of them. I can have my own television show right now. I can be my own publisher. I can advertise anything I want. I can build an audience, like what you said, Jorge. It's like all of a sudden we're now in, now 20 years later, the idea that you shouldn't be doing your own content is like the craziest idea. But 20 years ago, it was like, who do you think you are making your own content? That's literally what it was.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah.
And Deb, you had, because I now know your sort of Blurb origin story about having success with a book right off the bat. But what was there pushback from photographers that you were working with saying, like, because what I used to hear early on was it's not a real book, it's a Blurb book. And so it was kind of categorizing this into a subcategory of, well, you're not in the chosen crowd. So if you don't have any other choices, you can do a Blurb book. But it sounds like after success with your first book did you still run into people who felt that way?
Yes. I think, going back 20 years and thinking about, I was trying to remember conversations, but, at this point in my life, memories are getting a little fuzzy. But I do remember big conversations about, so what is a photo book, right? Like, I think that's what Blurb and print on demand did, was to force people to think about what a photo book actually is, and its definition, how it's, is it how it's made? Is it the materials that are used? Is it the types of imagery that's in a photo book? And now we're still having those conversations, right? About like, words and pictures. How much text do you have in a photo book? Is a photo book just of photographs, or is it imagery, overall? So in some ways, I feel like it was a great, something that upended everyone's familiarity of the world as how they see it, just like technology does all the time. And it forced us to have those conversations, which I think is a very positive thing moving forward. And look where we are now. Like, in terms of democratizing, I know people poo-poo that word, but as Darius was saying, like, I think you have more opportunities now than ever before. I think the challenge is filtering out the noise and cluing in on the signal, right? There's so many choices. There's so many ways to make a living, be the creator, that it can get a little noisy. But, I think that's also about listening to yourself, getting to know who you are, a little bit of self-awareness, and, sticking to that. I think, call that creative vision, creative voice, whatever that is. I think there's just I think you say this a lot, Dan, is that there's just some books that you just have to make, or some things you have to put out in the world.
Well, I think it's pretty interesting, because I think, Darius, you said something to me one time when I was thinking about doing a book. You said, ask yourself, does the world need this book? And I think to Deb's point about questioning what is a photography book, I just got a book that was gifted to me. I was on the way to buy it, and someone gifted it to me earlier in the same day. And it's a book called Things Become Other Things by Craig Maud. And it's a photo book masquerading as a novel, as a memoir. And it's the book I've been hoping some photographer would make, because this is a book that's going to go into so many more houses than a photo book would, even though there's a heavy concentration of photographs, but the paper's not a photo paper. It's all black and white. It's like an off sort of ivory colored newsprint, almost paper. It's such a beautifully done book. And to me, it also, to Deb's point, it helps you redefine what this idea of what a photo book should be.
Can I add one other little point to this, which was, Deb, you'll remember this, but at the turn of the millennium, 1999 into 2000, there was this explosion of like the best blah, blah, blah of the century, right? There were all of these like century, the end of the 20th century lists. And that really also fueled this interest in the history of the photo book. Little did we know at that moment that the technology around print on demand was in its earliest stages of being developed. But that really fed into those first years of the new millennium, was all about this like, well, wait a minute, what is that history of the photo book? And there were all of these scholarly books looking at books. And then all of a sudden you had this explosion of creativity around like anyone could make a book now. You didn't need a publisher. And I think that was a big part of that moment.
Oh, Y2K.
Y2K.
And think about the amazing amounts of self-published books through history, not just photo books, but what people were self-publishing before there were publishers, and also famous folks from the literary world or the photography world that just said, hey, I'm going to experiment and do something outside the bounds of tradition. There have been so many gems created. Totally. And I think that's the thing. I have a question here coming up that I think will address this to some degree, but I want to get to the next question, which is, and Jorge, you and Christelle, I'm going to ask this to you first, because you sort of skirted on this earlier. What is it about the tangibility of books that continues to amaze us, even in the digital age? What is it about that tangibility that's so important? And Christelle, I'll aim that at you.
Well, I think it's just that, right? The actual physicality. I'm the wrong person to ask, because I have a lot of, I miss things from the past. I have a lot of nostalgia. I miss Life magazine, and there's things that I like from before, not to say that I'm super excited about what's coming. But yeah, it's the physicality of it, and the experience of, I think it's something that becomes very intimate, because you're bringing it into your home. You can choose where you want to sit, can leave the pages at a pace. I don't know. It's really the physicality of it that for me is interesting.
You just said something that I absolutely love, and I never really thought about, which is you choose the location in which you're consuming that. And that's, I thought you were going to say you were the wrong person to ask because you just loved Instagram more than anything else. So I'm glad that's not the case. But that's such a fascinating thing, is choosing the location in which you're going to consume the work, which I guess you do the same thing kind of with the phone, but maybe it's not quite the same.
Yeah, it's not the same, because, you're sitting on, you go to your favorite corner on a couch. And so it becomes something just, I don't know, I think it becomes something really, really personal and very much you, that I think you don't quite get in the digital age with a phone, for example.
And Jorge,
you don't have notifications on it. I think, but it's true. So you can sit in the same chair, but you're not going to get distracted. And I think that one of the things that I believe makes it different and really interesting is that if you do it kind of well, photography wise, or talking about this audience that we were saying before, you engage with the people in a very different way, and there's this awe moment in which people say, okay, there's Instagram and there's the internet and stuff, but then when they have something in their hands, when you give it to them or whatever it is, it's like, oh wow, this is a different deal, right? And I think that it's interesting to think about it as, because often photographers, we fall into the only talking to other photographers, and I think that in my case, and I think Christelle and what we try to do is to create stuff for non-photographers. And when you show, a magazine or a book that you made 10 copies or whatever it is to someone, to my sister, she's going to say, wow, did you make this thing, right? And this is for real. I'm going to keep it. And it stays in a way that is now, it's like a book, right? Because it's a book. It's not this thing that you just double click and it goes away. So yeah, it's pretty powerful.
So I interviewed someone last week, and on stage he said, I've literally made tens of thousands of dollars in the past couple of years based on a little $3 zine, because he's a full-time filmmaker. He works in the film world, and very few people are now using print in the film world. And so for him, it was this like idea that he would put this in front of other directors and DPs, and same exact thing to what Jorge said. You made this. This is from the last thing that you did. He's taking still frames from motion footage and making these little zines. And I think you're absolutely right. Darius, what do you think about what is it about the tangibility aspect?
We're tangible. I think it's just the physical world is still our primary place, and as much as the digital is enthralling and exciting and shiny and fun, it's just still it's still not reality in a certain sense. Like there's still, I think, a very primal connection to all of the senses, like the touch, the sight, the smell, the whole package is what gets activated in us with the physical things. I'm like if this were a conversation about AI, I would have a whole bunch of things to say about that in a positive way. Like it's not about one is better than the other. It's just that the tangible still excites us in a way that is undeniable.
So I keep a physical notebook, and I'm always asked by people, why don't you just do it on your iPad? Because it's a pain to carry these things around. And I use like a sizable journal, and I'm packing for Morocco, and I'm thinking, take something smaller, but I know I won't. I'm going to take this giant book. And it's the same thing. There's to be able to sit and the touch and the smell of the ink and the ink on my fingers, it's a big deal. Yeah. I'm going to shift to the next question. And Deb, I'm going to aim this one at you, because I think that there's definite need for improvement here. But what still needs to improve in the self-publishing world, and what does the future of print look like? But let's talk initially here about what needs to, there are two things that jump out to me, but what do you think needs to be improved with the self-pub world?
Well, now I'm curious what you're going to offer. Like, it seems like a big question.
You want to know what I would say?
What's that?
You want to know what I would say?
Yeah.
Marketing and distribution. Those are two self-pub things that not everyone, I see amazing photographers who can create almost like generational talent level of photography, but they don't have an audience, they don't know how to market, and they can't distribute their books. So
I feel like that's been a thing for a long time, not just with self-publishing. And that's why, maybe this gets into, I think it was a comment that Darius made about, exclusivity and gatekeepers and things. Like, I mean, that's one of the benefits you get from working with a traditional publisher, is that you get the marketing vehicles. Well, with some publishers, I should say, you get the marketing resources behind the publisher's name. Whereas with self-publishing, it's definitely something that needs to be thought of almost before you think about actually creating or designing the book. Like, think about who is your audience. Will they be receptive to whatever idea that you have? It's almost like, I've encouraged photographers just kind of disclose everything a little bit. There's a lot of marketing things like teasing things, in little bits, in little chunks, showing your behind the scenes, process, even like the ideation process. Like, what are you thinking about? Share those ideas, see how they might be receptive. Because you have to build that audience before you actually get to thinking about, do I want to make a book, 11 by 14, 10 by 10, or like 5 by 5, or what paper, or even what printer. You're kind of putting the cart before the horse in that respect.
I think that's an absolutely incredibly poignant point, which is, I always tell people, the marketing for your book starts the day you have the idea to do the photographs or create the kind of work that you want to make. That's the day that you start documenting and you start sharing, so that when it's complete, there's an audience waiting that knows what it is, that is already, you've already surveyed to know what they're willing to buy, what they're interested in, that kind of thing. So Darius, what do you think needs to be improved for self-pub?
I'm not sure anything does. I mean, I think that in the sense that I just keep feeling like the tools at everyone's fingertips are so immense. If anything, what needs to be improved is the ability to self-reflect on the part of the creative. Now, we could be talking about the music industry, or you're a recent MFA grad in painting, and you're like, how do I start a career in the art world? All of it is about understanding what your strengths are and what are your weaknesses, and then finding a way to delegate off your plate the things you're not good at to people that are good. And that may be the marketing and the branding side, but the tools are there if you are good at it. Just all of those things. There's a lot of making a career as a creative just requires so much self-reflection about the various elements of that career, and knowing what you're good at, what you're not, and building that support team in a way.
Can I say something real quick?
Hang on 1 second, Jorge, and then I'll get to you. But what Darius just said was that was a little bit of tough love, but it was delivered so easily and casually. But it is such a critical point about saying, am I good enough? Is this work good enough? And being honest. And so I get approached by a lot of people who say things to me like, how am I going to live off of my photo book sales proceeds? And I have to say to them immediately, you won't. I don't know anybody who lives off their photo book thing. So it's an incredibly helpful, but also very painful thing to self-reflect and say, this might not be good enough. I have to keep working. So that's a great answer. Jorge, what did you want to add?
Well, I was going to say that it's a little bit of tough love as well, as like you do. I would add something actually, which is probably not possible, but this audience thing is that now audiences are global, and it's pretty complicated to get. If you have people that wants to buy your stuff in India or in Singapore, it's not so easy, right? And then you have to send it to your own place, and then send it to whoever is in that other place. So I don't know if that's something that it's fixable. I think it's probably incredibly complicated, but it could be cool.
No, I think it's, the Blurb has a bookstore where you can put books, and obviously Deb was talking about that, people going directly to the Blurb bookstore to buy. It's not a perfect system, but it's a pretty interesting little stopgap for delivering books. I think Blurb delivers to like 70 different countries, but yeah, I think it speaks back to the distribution and having, having your entire print run, having it shipped to you, and then you being the media mail person that has to ship it out. Now, you two do a Raw Society magazine, which is absolutely beautiful. It is one of the best pubs I've seen come out of the photo world in a long time. And I think you're on issue. You've done 3 so far.
We're working on our 4th.
And that's I get the media mail package with your issue, but I understand what kind of headache there is behind the scenes. So okay, so we're getting close here. Air just wrote 140. Do we deliver to 140 countries? And am I misreading that about something else? That seems like a lot. I'm not a math guy, but 140. Yes, we shipped to 140. I didn't even know there were 140 countries. I thought it was 120.
Oh my God, Dan.
Maybe we're inventing some countries. I'm fine with that.
Brazil's missing. I know that for a fact.
I want to ask one more question, and then maybe 2, and then I want to make sure that we talk about some of the things that you all have coming up, and also I need to remind everyone about future Blurb events. But Darius, I'm going to start with you on this one because you kind of skirted around this a second ago, which was the question is, are there too many photo books? And this is something I hear all the time where people are like, oh, it's just flooded. There's just too many, which is personally, I think it's always been true. But I still think it's a good thing. What do you think?
There's never enough.
There we go. Bingo.
Never enough. I mean, look, the reality is, are there too many musicians? Are there too many writers? Are there too many aspiring actors? Like, no, the answer is there's a lot of us on this planet. And I would rather have people thinking about what is the most creative thing they can add to our collective existence, to furthering civilization and with arts at the center of it. So yeah, bring your best shot to the planet. I mean, the fact that we can engage with creatives and audiences around the world is just nuts. When I was a kid, I was just trying to find what was cool that was happening like in Chicago. That was like my point of reference. Now it's like, well, wait a minute, what's happening in Kampala? Like I feel like I've got FOMO about places that Dan hasn't even heard of. So anyway, it's like, no, like just bring your best creative thing to the table, and let's all like enjoy it.
Well, I mean, Raw Society is about to have a festival in Menorca, right?
Yeah.
So to your point, it's like, you know, I would say at least a significant portion of Americans would never be able to find Menorca or know that it existed. But here, and if you know who's coming, the lineup of people they have, you're like, oh my God. And same thing. It's like FOMO about what's happening in Menorca. So,
and there's a photo book fair, by the way, which hearing you guys talk about this whole photography book now thing, you might have to restart it for this festival. I'm just saying.
Me and you, we got to do it again.
Okay.
Darius and I have been talking about that for at least a year. You know, when we figured out it was Blurb's 20th coming up, first thing Darius said was, "Oh, we got to do PBN again. We got to do PBN." But
what are you waiting for? I am giving you the space to do it.
It is a monumental lift for sure. Deb, I'm sure that because you designed photo books for a lot of people, was that ever part of the conversation of, oh, there's just too many photo books out there, it's watering things down? Nothing?
I don't know who you've been talking to, Dan.
I'm like a giant sieve at the end of the river. I'm all the debris.
Yeah, or maybe I'm just hanging out with the wrong people. I don't know, but you know, I'm with Darius. Like, bring it on. You know, like it's again going back to what's available now that was not available then is astounding, and I feel like people feel empowered to make. So go make it, put it out in the world. It doesn't have to be perfect. Like, I give everyone permission not to have a perfect thing that goes out into the world. I also give you permission to not feel like you have to make your living through photo books or through photography. It's perfectly okay to have another job or something that pays the bills while you focus on this, you know, creative outlet. It's a labor of love. Go for it. Like, whatever you have to do it. And, you know, going back to like physical books, to me, books are a conversation starter. It's a bridge to collaboration. It's a bridge to community. It's a way to connect globally as well as locally, and, you know, right in your own neighborhood. So that's what I got to say about photo books.
And Christelle, do you still have the Martin Parr book in front of you?
I do.
Can you hold that up? This to me answers the question beautifully. So this is the Martin Parr book that has the little puzzle on the cover where the ball goes through the plastic maze.
You probably can't see it.
You know, is that, and it's filled of the most amazing self-portraits. You know, I'm so jealous of that book. But to me, that's the perfect explanation, or the perfect answer to that question is, would anybody have like commissioned that book to be made? No, but it was knowing Martin Parr, that's floating around in his head. That is such a perfect example of, no, there's not too many photo books. You know, and also I think a really good point to keep in mind is you're not going to hit home runs every time. I'm sure that Martin has mocked up books that he probably looked at and said, you know what, this isn't quite there, or maybe I don't need to do this book. And the guy still puts out as many photo books as anybody else. So I think we've all done a really good job of answering that. This is a very, very short answer from everyone. That's what I'm asking for here, because this is a tricky one and I don't necessarily have an answer to it. And then I want to promote what you guys are doing. And give me 5 words or less. What's one unexpected innovation in print that you would predict for the next decade? And I have no idea. So Deb, how about you? Anything off the top of your head?
I mean, if we're talking about, I'm more focused on maybe because I'm in product design at the moment. I'm thinking about operations and the technology of printing. Like, I would love to see, I don't know if this could ever happen, but if we could think about books as various components, and we could mix and match a little bit more. And mix and match to scale, I think would be kind of fun. So yeah, I you know, from little research that I've done, I think there are some companies out there that are building machines in Italy and mostly in Europe, essentially, that can do these kinds of things. But then how do we connect those things with software to go into a workflow that makes that process much smoother? That's what I'm hoping for.
Darius, what about you?
I was going to say more scratch and sniff.
Okay, I love it. I love scratch and sniff postcards. And Jorge and Christelle, what about you? Any innovations in print that you think are going to happen in the next decade? That's a tricky question.
I can tell you what I would like to have. It's more, related to software, to have, some type of way, which it might exist, of collaborating. So we do this magazine, and there's 12 or 14 stories, and there's editors and all that stuff. So it would be great to see how the design start to happen, real time, for example, instead of sending edits and stuff and giving back, that kind of thing would be pretty cool. But I don't know, it might exist.
Yeah, very interesting. I didn't think about the software angle, but collaboration, because to what we've been talking about, everybody's building their own audience, and something to streamline that would be interesting. My take is I think you're going to start to see a return. You're going to see a lot more independent newspapers coming back, not official, like, owned by Gannett or anything like that. I'm talking about individual people publishing newspapers. And I've already started to see it and hear it a lot. But okay, a couple of things. That was masterful job on answering all the questions. There's a couple of things I want to do before we hit the end here. We just have a couple of minutes left. Christelle and Jorge, tell us a little bit about the festival that you have coming up. When is it? Where is it?
Okay, so the festival is in Menorca, Spain. It is not Mallorca, it's Menorca, the little island next to Mallorca. And it will be happening in May 2026. So from the 7th till the 10th. We have an incredible list of photographers that will be coming to exhibit. And we'll be having a book fair. And a lot of pretty fun activities that are perhaps a little unexpected for a photo festival, but we want it to be fun. And I think we've had like a couple of really shitty years. Am I allowed to say shitty?
Sure.
And so we want this to be more about discovery and enjoyment and just having fun and going back to kind of basics.
Excellent. And Darius, where can people find Publish Your Photography Book?
You can find it at the Radius Books website, radiusbooks.org, or your favorite independent bookstore, or on Amazon, obviously. Yeah.
And there's a couple of things I need to promote for Blurb. And this is, we have two new upcoming, two additional online events that we're doing. One is on October 23rd, and this is about editing. It's about culling and editing your work. And we have another on November 3rd, which is about sequencing your work, which feels like sort of the lost family member of the book design world. There's always a lot of talk about editing, but sequencing sometimes gets overlooked. And I also want to share for everyone who's watching this right now, we have a code that you can use to get a nice, healthy discount on your book, which is We Make Books 30. That is the code that we want to make sure that everyone knows about. We Make Books 30 is the code, and it is valid for exactly 1 month. And I love this. So it's valid from October 2nd to November 2nd. And I love coupons that are short dated because it forces you to take action. Remember that there is no such thing as a perfect photography book. I think perfect holds a lot of people back from hitting that print button and learning from test book and evaluating your work as you go along. So that was the program for today. I want to say thank you to all the panelists. Thank you for taking the time to do this. I know it's we all have busy schedules, and this, who knows, you could be in casual Friday. Darius could have shorts on for all we know. Could be casual Friday. So thanks again for doing all this. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Best of luck with all your publishing endeavors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for having us.